everyone, and welcome to the Jeff Buller Show. Today I have with Ryan Weiss. I love the name, but he's a good guy because, as we know, Miami Vice is a little bit on the other side of where Ryan is, actually. But Ryan's from Austin, Texas. He's currently on the coast, and we're interviewing from his beach house. And that's what's great to love about this digital world we live in, isn't it? So Ryan is the co-founder and CEO of Vice Software, which provides cost-effective web development services. He's done 20 years in shipping software, 6 years in building high-velocity development teams. He's published 2 books, and we'll discover a bit more about that later. And lead architect for countless projects. He's been awarded Microsoft's MVP award 3 times, and that's not for basketball, I don't think. And no. Ryan decided to transfer his skills to an entrepreneurial space. Now, Vice Software doesn't operate like most development companies. Instead, they utilize modern toolkits and globally distributed teams, and that's an interesting thing we're going to talk about as well, to bring clients impressive design at reasonable price points. So the unique structure of the team allows Ryan to remain very hands-on, helping to create architecture, patterns, processes, and best practices for maximum velocity and ROI. So what's really impressive is over the past 3 years, Ryan has led his company, Vice Software, to 50% year-over-year growth as a team grew from 15 to 45. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Ryan, we were talking before about Joseph Campbell and heroes' journeys and origin stories. So, off the bat, I'm going to ask you, what got you into, number one, software, and then what inspired you to start your own software company?
So the software journey for me started, I was an oil brat in the 70s, and my dad was having a pretty good career, and his boss at the time was one of the more successful entrepreneurs in Thailand, a guy named Bill Heineke. And I became good friends with Bill's son, and they were, financially doing pretty well. And so I would go and hang out with Bill's son his name was David, during the day. And him and I just kind of got to experience all kinds of cool things with him. And one of the things he showed me was that he was like, for one, I hadn't really seen personal computers too much. They were fairly new at that time. So he showed me his computer, and then he showed me that he could write code that would control the computer. And I thought it was like pretty magical and awesome. And so he told me that, I just took the classes down here, you could ask your dad to hook you up and you could take those classes too. And so, pardon me. So I ended up taking the programming classes, and, it's just really basic stuff, drawing these big square kind of pictures and making the stuff move around on the screen. But that was my first taste, and I really enjoyed it. And it started out kind of as a hobby type thing for me.
How old were you then?
Oh, I was probably like 12-ish.
Okay.
And so that's when I first got started. My parents were separated, and so I would live a little bit with my mom and a little bit with my dad. And it was I got to see 2 very different sides of the social spectrum. I was living extremely poor in the South here in America, in Louisiana, when I'd live with my mom, and pretty well with my dad overseas in these different countries. So it was a pretty unique upbringing. But because of that, when I was in the States, I didn't have access to computers very often. So it wasn't until I got into college years later that I got to get back on the programming journey there. And I was motivated by honestly, like Pixar. I thought the Pixar movies were really cool. I wanted to get into computer graphics. And one of the tables I was waiting on when I was a waiter at the time, they were in that industry, and they told me, if you can program computers, like, you should do that, because that'll be the best way to kind of get into graphics. And so I went to college, pardon me, studying computer graphics. And at that time, all of the all the people I knew who were from the States, who were in programming at that time, and I would hang out with, pretty much everybody was wanting to get into programming for video games or some kind of graphics or whatever. So one of my buddies, I always joke that I learned more about programming from copying his assignments than from my professors. And he actually is part of the Roblox IPO right now. He just made a ton of money off of that IPO, and he's worked at EA and all that kind of stuff. So he actually went that route with it. But after school, I took it on the business route. I decided at that time you didn't get paid very much if you were programming video games.
Right.
And for me, I kind of felt like when you're in the code, what does it really matter? You know, I mean, it's all for me. It's just as fun to program business code as it is video games. You know, so.
Yeah, I'd love the term you used actually when you said you discovered software. Is that you could write something and then you would make things, create something magical, as in make something move on a screen. And I agree with you. I think this intersection of hardware and software and the technology world we live in today, you're essentially creating magic, and I think that's pretty impressive. It's like, and a lot of it's not visible. Like a lot of the stuff happening is just energy transfer.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Yep.
but yeah, what's happened with computer graphics and now movie animation and is just mind-boggling. And games are going to a whole new level as well. So you've done your degree. You've learnt more from copying your mates' projects.
Yeah.
And as an ex-teacher, I sort of get that because teachers teach because that's all they can do. The real people get out in the world and actually make things happen and do things and learn from their mistakes. Right. Yeah. So I was only a teacher for 6 years, and I went, so time to leave this behind, because I just discovered a lot of it. I suppose academia is really good, but I admire people that really do stuff, as to get their hands dirty, dive in and learn from that, and obviously learning from your mate. So you do uni, you get your Bachelor of Science degree, and what happened next?
So it took me a little while to get through school, but when I finally got out of school, I graduated, and it was an interest. I'm really glad it happened this way, but I wouldn't want to do it again. But I graduated in '99. And 99 was very similar to it is now. The demand was through the roof. The .com was absolutely massive. And so at that time, the types of work environments that were in the tech companies weren't anywhere else. So I got out of school and I got a job at this company, and they would like go pick up beer for everyone on Fridays. And they were flying around helicopters in the offices, and we were playing chess like at work, and like take 2-hour lunches and go like shopping. And it was just like, you know, really, we were just blown away. Like, how this is fantastic. They gave me all these stock options, and I'm just thinking, wow, you know, all that work is worth it. You know, we've arrived, you know, this is great. I even had a pretty embarrassing moment where my wife, who I've been with for, you know, ever since, it's been about 20 years now. We were just getting ready to get married, and I got so full of it. I'm like, we might need to consider a prenup or something. You know what I mean? Which was just so embarrassing and ridiculous. But really, 6 months later, it all came crashing down spectacularly, right? And so then I got my first taste of kind of getting laid off. You know, I didn't even understand what that was. My boss took me in a room, and he passed me this note, and he's like, "This is your severance." And I was like, okay. And I was trying to act like I knew what it was, but I didn't. And then I opened it up and I was reading it, and he was talking, and I just kind of zoned him out. And finally, after I read enough of it, I was like, wait a minute, does this mean I don't have a job anymore? You know? And he's like, no, you don't. And I was like, but I can keep the money. He's like, yeah. It's like, okay, that's not so bad. You know, it's like, you know, it's better than losing your job waiting tables, you know? But that ended up, that kept happening to me every, by the second week of January every year I get laid off. Is like, I guess, end of year budgets, and you know,
right.
And I just was having a really, really hard time staying employed and staying afloat. And so it really humbled me in the right kind of way. It really made me super hungry. And what I saw during that time was that when I was on these software projects, I saw that there were folks that wouldn't get laid off, and that seemed very autonomous. And those folks were just really masters of their craft, and then empathetic to the business, you know? And so when I saw that, I was like, if I get good enough that'll get me job security, because I didn't see any other path to job security. So that's when I just really focused on the craft side of software development, and just dove in and started just always working on, I always had a passion for it anyway. And so I just kind of went all in with the passion, and I was able to level up my skills that way. And then that led me to, I moved to Austin about 10 years later, I think. And when I moved to Austin, my career kind of exploded. The Houston and Austin, you got an international audience here. They won't know what the difference is, but they're drastically different places. And so Austin is exploding because it's an extremely progressive San Francisco type place. All of the tech hubs are like that, New York, San Francisco, et cetera. Houston is not that kind of place. It's an oil and gas type town.
Yep.
And it just wasn't a great culture for me, in my opinion, for folks who were really wanting to explore the craft side of software. Skills were not the most valuable commodity in Houston. It was more kind of politics and things like that. But once I moved to Austin, like my career just kind of exploded. That's when I got my MVP award and started getting book deals and stuff like that. And that's kind of what really solidified to me that I wanted to be a consultant. Was, after going through getting laid off, and the stress of that, the switching over to, okay, now I can have different projects. The projects last for a year. I'm learning all these different technologies and building up my skills and creating creating job security just by having such, a diverse set of skills. So that's pretty much what pointed me in that direction, which if I didn't graduate into the recession and go through all that, I could have just kind of probably kicked back at one job and just kept, playing chess and, whatever. And I imagine a lot of the folks these days, the millennials might benefit from a similar a similar struggle,
Yeah, well, it's I think what I've certainly learned over the years is you don't learn from pleasure, you learn from pain.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like an accelerant. It's like, when I learn fast, here's a little bit of pain.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to redefine yourself. The other thing, the other thing that was interesting you mentioning too is that you talked about Houston being more about politics and oil, and then you'd go to Texas, you go to Austin, sorry, and it's a totally different culture and environment. So it's almost like you're moving into old style of business to new style of business.
Correct.
Because I really think we're in the middle of a huge shift in how we do business globally. And, there's the traditional industries and then there's the new industries. And COVID's actually accelerating, I think, change as well. That's the other thing that is certainly I've noticed, is that I think we're accelerating like 10 years into 1 or 2 years, essentially. It's just forcing
Absolutely.
change. Yeah, forcing change on all of us. So when you mentioned that, you noticed that other guys, people, were the ones that were really good were the ones that were, getting the good gigs, getting the good jobs. You had that insight. So what do you mean by taking your craft to the next level? What were the type of things that you said, I really need to work on this or these things? What is that craft?
So basically what I ended up doing was just saying yes to everything. So the Microsoft MVP awards that you mentioned in the beginning of the show, those came about because I started doing this technology that was a little rare, esoteric type technology. It was like this new emerging stuff that not a lot of folks wanted to work on. And I had someone come to me and say, hey, do you want to learn this stuff? It's for business processes, modeling business processes. And I was like, sure. And then I thought about it and I'm like, I don't know anyone who knows this stuff. And if I get stuck, I'm just going to be stuck, and I was 4 years out of school and I was the main person that was supposed to be doing this stuff. So I came in and I noticed that they had a support forum that was kind of a community driven thing. And so I get on the support forum and start asking questions in the beginning. But I realized that, if I'm just always in there asking questions, I might not get as much responses, and so what I started doing was just kind of chipping in. And so I would watch the forums And then someone else would ask a question and I'd be like, hey, I knew that one, you know. And so I started answering questions. And they had kind of a scoreboard on there that would
Right.
show who the top answerers were. And then I got kind of like, well, you know, I wouldn't mind being the top guy. You know what I mean? And so I just got really like into it. And I started just answering all these questions. Then I saw that my alma mater, University of Houston, was having a technical festival, and they didn't have anyone talking on that topic. And so, you know, I sent them a mail and said, hey, you know, I noticed y'all didn't have anyone talking on this topic. I'd be happy to talk on it. I'm the top answerer on the forum. That was kind of like my status. You know? And they were like, sure, you know, you can talk on it, you know. And so then that led me to getting noticed by the folks at Microsoft as being someone who was contributing. And I started kind of doing blog posts around that same topic as well. And then it just, the software development, you're talking about this modern works environment, a big part of software development, which is real similar to entrepreneurship, it's just the community aspect of it and the sharing.
Mm-hmm.
People are very much, there's just so many people. It kind of blows my mind. You'll see these tools out there and you're like, they're really cool. And you're like, I cannot believe that someone spent all their free time creating
Yeah.
this tool.
Yep.
I've got a buddy who wrote a popular open source tool 15, 20 years ago, and it's still popular. He's still maintaining it. He's like running a software
Wow.
project for free, you know? And so, so I got into that community side of things. And then that led me into kind of getting some offers on some book deals. I just had some really fortunate right place at right time, kind of timing type aspects. The books I wrote were like, you know, I'm not writing Lord of the Rings or any kind of interesting cool stuff like that. You know, it was just like basically glorified instruction manuals. You know, it's just like, I've done this. This is how I did it. And basically it was just research books, because it took me, like this one project I was on, it took me about 6 to 8 months to figure out this technique that was really getting popular. And I figured it out, but I figured it out by finding all these little bits and pieces of information all over the internet. It's like an archaeologist or something. And then it was like, you know, there's an opportunity here to take all that information and combine it into a cohesive source, you know.
Mm.
And so that's kind of what the books were like. And at that, when I wrote my last book, people were still reading books. Um, More recently, I don't know if people for technology, it moves so fast now.
Yeah.
I don't know if people are writing books. Like, I joked that my last book I wrote was actually a history book. Because by the time we got it in the market, it was just like, yeah, hey man, if you want to know how you would have done stuff 6 months ago, this is a, this is a great guide to what you would have done 6 months ago, but not now. You know?
Okay, very
And
cool.
so,
Well, maybe you could call your book Lord of Code.
yeah, that's a good one.
Lord of the
That's a
Codes.
good one. Yeah,
Or you could call it the history of software.
yeah. Fellowship of the script. You know?
Yeah,
But
so yeah, so that's really interesting. So this is what is fascinating when you get really passionate about something. I think obviously you move from just doing code and sort of being interested into being much more passionate about it. And I think the other thing that when you were talking, you mentioned that you started to be noticed. In other words, you were scored on. In other words, you would it maybe felt a sense of accomplishment, saying, "I actually know more than I know, than I think I know," and it's valued, and people were affirming your skills, I suppose. So,
yeah, that was definitely part of it. And then like going talk at my university was that I had graduated from. I was just like, wow, I get to go and be like a teacher for a day, you know. So a lot of it was just for the pride side of it and kind of self accomplishment at first. And before I got into that stuff, it's going to sound completely unrelated, but it kind of isn't. I've always been super busy on the weekends. So I'm into skateboarding. And so I was running a skateboard website that got really popular. And I got approached by a surfing magazine. And I ended up partnering with them and doing like this print skateboard magazine for like a couple of years. In the last issue, we had a like staff of around 11 people. It never made a dime, but I thought it was really cool at the time. But my poor wife was, you know, I'm super fortunate to still have her, you know, coming along for the journey with me, because I think a lot of women would have been like, you know, you're spending all your weekends on this nerdy stuff. I don't really want to have any of that, but she stuck through it, and
Yeah.
so
Well, she must love you. That's good.
well, she's still around, so she's still putting up with me, so that's good. Yeah.
That's great. So that's interesting. Your comments about, I suppose, being affirmed. In other words, and being noticed. And this is a part of. I'm really still very curious about is what drives us as human beings. You might have a passionate interest in something that might be innate, and you've actually got some skills because you're able to do code. I can't do code to save myself, so obviously I'm not meant to be a programmer. But I admire those that do, such as yourself, and I'm going, wow, that you make the computer do this by writing these lines of code. Whether it's an app or it's a platform or software for a tool for business. So you're doing these projects, and then so what was the inspiration? What was the call to go and start your own business? How did that happen?
So, like I mentioned earlier, I had exposure to entrepreneurs at a young age. I remember my dad explaining to me what entrepreneurship was, and he just always had his eye on the ball for that. And so from a young age, I always kind of knew about it and thought it was cool and something worthy of going after. And my dad would come home and have like the nightly dinner table pitches, like, hey, what about a company that does this, and so he actually had some success in the entrepreneurial journey as well, but he ended up making kind of after he did his company, he did a company in Singapore. After that all fizzled out for him, he moved on and had a lot of success in the corporate side with the skills he had built.
Yep.
So that was kind of the initial seed that got planted. And then later, so that kind of had me eyeballing it. And then what I found is that when I started working in more, professional type jobs, the CEOs and the founders would come out and just be talking about all the exciting stuff going on with the company and all this. And I just was looking at it thinking like, why can't I be on that side of the table? I don't, I just wanted to see what it was like on the other side of the table, essentially. And so it actually got to a point where I was getting pretty obsessive about it. And it was really getting frustrating for me. And I'm sure my wife was getting sick of hearing about it because I was just constantly complaining about the chicken and egg problem with starting a company.
Yeah.
And I just didn't understand. I'm like, how do these people go from having a day job to having an actual company?
Good question.
And so yeah, it's one of the biggest nuts to crack. And so I had just worked at a company called Headspring, which was a boutique style consulting company in Austin, which was considered one of the premier places to work. And most of the programmers that worked there had either published books or done reputable open source projects or something like that. So it's like a kind of high end, it's like your Porsche or something like that. And so when I worked there, I had exposure to the CEO because it was a smaller company. It's probably about 15 people or something. And the CEO was a guy named Dustin Wells. And I ended up researching a lot of, because I thought the way they ran the company was amazing. And so I ended up researching a lot on Dustin and listening to some podcasts and interviews he had done. And that basically gave me some of the initial starting ideas I had, which is basically his core thesis was that if you're going to have a service company, the most important thing is that your customers like you. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about his journey and starting like working and at lunchtime going and like taking any job he could get and just kind of coding up these websites and different things, on his lunch break and before work and after work and making sales calls and kind of doing that. I think there's two ways that you can kind of get started. And the one way is that you kind of, I call it, well, it's not my phrase, but I always say fake it till you make it. And so in that approach, you're working your day job, you got your LLC and your business cards and your website. You're just going around telling people, this is my company and this is what I do, but it's really nothing there at that time. Or you can kind of save up a bunch of money and then go all in, quit your day job. And, I've saved up 6 months roadmap and you hire some people straight out the gate. if I was younger, I probably could have done that approach. But when I first tried to start a business, I had two kids, and my wife was likely pregnant for our third. Um, and there was just a lifestyle I had to maintain, so I had to go the fake it till you make it route.
Mm. I think that's a great observation, and that is the biggest challenge is um, how do I transition to doing what I've dreamed about and that I want to really do, like start a business and be my own boss. And we both know that that the reality of being your own boss is sometimes a little bit tougher than we realise until you do it. But the way you did it is essentially what we call a side hustle. In other
Yeah,
words,
absolutely.
yeah, and that was something that I did too. I'd done both. I'd done both routes. I've had enough money in the bank. I've just leapt into the void, and crash and burn. And look, I've had a couple of one business where I leapt in and for 2 years it was going gangbusters, and then there was a crunch and we had to close down. But that was the Big Bang Theory is maybe the best way to describe that. The other one is a side hustle. So, and when I started my publishing business, the blog back in 2009, it was a side hustle. And there's no right or wrong because everyone's got a different, I think, level of risk taking. And I think that is part of the fun is that you can start as a side hustle and you also got to keep people on side sometimes. Like your wife wants to feel that she's got a roof over her head and the family's being looked after. My family broke up because the business folded
Yeah.
about 15 years ago. So look, I've seen it all as well, and it's a tough gig. And I think what I've learnt is that side hustles can become main hustles, and they can be very. And so part of what I love hearing is your stories of how you did it. How did you get to do what you did? So, and if you've got a bunch of money, you sort of get a bit lazy sometimes. I think you're going,
Yeah.
I've got 100,000 in the bank. Oh, I can just cruise. The side hustle, you're almost like testing a business on the side. Really, it's almost like a research project. But
It absolutely is. And one of my good buddies, who I actually should have called him out as someone who was inspirational when I first moved to Austin, and when I was kind of doing my first book and all that, I was working with this guy named Daryl Augustinelli, and he had massive side hustle going, and he's got his own consulting company now too. And he kind of really helped me navigate some of the getting started aspects of it and how to position yourself and things like that. And then before we move on, though, I do want to mention, like when you were mentioning about the wives, a lot of my colleagues wouldn't have been able to do what I did. I mean, if you have multiple kids that are our kids are all close together, so we had like when I decided to write my book, Heather had just had our second child. I was working mandatory 50-hour weeks for Charles Schwab. We had a 2-year-old, and then by the time we started the business, there was 3 kids, all under probably the age of 5.
yep,
And then a husband who's working a day job, and then the side hustle. And the way I did that is I get up, I get the superpower from my dad where I can get up early, like no matter what. So I was getting up at like 5 in the morning and working with the team offshore on all these projects, and then going into an office at 9 o'clock and then working until about 4, and then maybe coming home and working some more, and then
yeah,
working on the weekends. And this is after all these other, writing the book and all this stuff. So without a doubt, having a good partner in crime like Heather is invaluable, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without it. I would have had to choose between family and the business.
mm. Yeah, that's great to hear. When I started, I discovered that getting up early when no one was awake, gave me my time to actually write. And because the blog was just simple. I wrote a blog, well, simple in one sense, but I got up at 4:30 a.m. for 4 years and wrote before I started my day job. And but I didn't find it difficult to do. It's almost like I almost had like a nuclear reactor inside me that was just providing the energy and drive. And it fascinates me today is what drives us as human beings. Where does that motivation come from to get up early or stay up late? and do the work. And I think it's certainly it's like a super force. It's like a superpower. And but you discover a lot of people that do a side hustle do that. They get up early or stay up late. But
Mm-hmm.
I think they're also driven by something they love doing. It's
Yep.
and and it's also, and I think you've got to ask what my why am I doing this? And I think if you write down 10 things why you are doing it, and I did that the other day, was I wrote down why I am doing a certain thing. I went, wow, okay, I'm doing this for many reasons. So it's almost like these whys stack up and become an engine. And yeah, but that fascinates me today, and is part of what I write about too a lot personally. So yeah, but so you start the business. You've doing a side hustle. When did you go main hustle?
So the inflection point was so first I probably just need to call out that when I first started the side hustle, when it got serious, um, I had gotten a few contracts where after getting the book deals and doing that kind of stuff, I found myself working for really large companies managing offshore teams in India.
Yeah,
Um, and I absolutely hated it. It was just driving me nuts. I'd have like 2 hours and they weren't hiring like the top quality teams or anything like that. And I don't even know if at that time the dev culture there was, I mean, the dev culture in India is really awesome now. And those devs are, you know, getting the big bucks and all that, just like anywhere else. But at the time, I don't know if we were just the company I was subcontracting through was sourcing the wrong candidates or whatever. But it was a really frustrating model to try and get work right. And I'd have 36 developers and 2 hours a day to talk to them, and the skill sets weren't there. And it's just super frustrating. I'm sure most folks could relate if you've had kind of a frustrating offshore experience. You get someone on the phone or something and you can't really communicate well. And then that kind of repeated a few times until I worked with my partner Prashant at this company where we were doing predictive analysis software for the medical industry, and so it would like try and predict the likelihood that folks would come back into the ER to help the nurses kind of figure out who they should focus on. And when I worked with Prashant, it was completely different. He was awesome to work with. He was super curious. And him and I had really successful outcomes at that company. And we both saw the value in it. And we both realized how hard it was to create the team of the kind that we created, because you had to have a guy like me in the US and a guy like him there. Those two folks had to have the right chemistry.
yep,
So you have to have boots on the ground, the right relationships, expensive resources. And we're like, this is why none of the small companies are doing it. All the big companies are doing it. And so Prashant told me one morning, he's like, man, screw this, man. He's like, let's take this on the road and go sell it to some people. He's like, you're entrepreneurial, I'm entrepreneurial. And so I told him like, yeah, sure. Why don't you try and get it going? I'll try and get it going. Let's try and collaborate. And if we get enough collaborations, then we'll have something. And so that's when I went and I got my DBA. And I just started the fake it till you make it of telling people, yeah, I've got this company and, I've got this team. And so we did that to answer your question about when did where was the inflection point where it changed? The inflection point was I always had a main contract that didn't involve the offshore team. And so I was always working some contract, and I'd negotiate those contracts to where it would be like part-time 35-hour a week contract.
yep,
And I had to pitch the way I did that and all that. I just kind of tell them, I bill my time honestly. And, if I'm billing 40 hours a week, I'm really working 50, I was like, so I don't want to tell you I'm going to bill 40 because really I'd be overcharging you. I'm really going to be billing like 35. And so that allowed me to kind of get, okay, that you're a part-time employee. And then like, if I ran into anything, I say, look, I told him I was part-time. And so I did that for a while. And then finally we got enough business where I could essentially quit my main hustle contract and just focus just on the project stuff. And that kind of happened with this really stressful timing where there was this big contract that was out there, which is one of our biggest customers now. And then this cash cow contract that I had worked on and done like 2 tours of duty for that was really providing us a nice lifestyle. So I had talked to the bigger guys and I didn't have as much experience with contracts at that time. And I thought the deal was signed, sold, and delivered, which it wasn't. And so I quit my cash cow contract. And then I got some static back from the big contract. Um, that, I was like, oh my God, is this not going to go through? And then I almost had a heart attack that day, because from stress. And then the next day, it all ended up working out and we got the contract. But it was definitely one of the most stressful days in my life. And that was probably my truest entrepreneur kind of risk it kind of moment.
Yep.
But then that contract came through, and that gave us enough kind of, that's probably when we switched from survival to sustainable, which was
Mm-hmm.
about 3 years in, or 4 years. I thought it was going to be 2 years, but it was more like 3 or 4 years in before we got sustainable. And then we got on a growth path. Um, and the thing that really allowed us to be successful was from this podcast I listened to with Dustin, where he was talking about making sure the clients were happy. Uh, I decided to quantify that into some core values. And so we have much different values than most companies. Now, probably need to update that. But we just have two simple values. And like one is that customers are comfortable with their invoices.
Yep.
And then the other is that we don't give anything away for free. And so what ends up happening, the outcome of that is that if we're doing a project for you and you come and you say, man, why did this take so long? And they had to rewrite that and all that. What's the conversation going to be? It's going to be like, hey, what do you think it's worth? Let's make this right. So you end up dropping some stuff off the bill. So I just gave something away for nothing. Well, the way we avoid breaking that principle is that every mistake is a new process.
Mm-hmm.
And so by having those two principles in place, or those two values, it's forced us to kind of take the burden of all the mistakes we make on a financial level as a company. And it's forced me and Prashant as partners to work 3-4 months long projects with no profits, working on our vacations and all this kind of stuff. But it's really forced us to kind of experience pain from our mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
and then improve our processes. And so we get pretty frequent compliments now in our sales cycle that when folks see how we approach things, that our processes for the size of company we are extremely mature, and but not too heavy and that kind of thing. Just real practical stuff.
So you raised a couple of things, a couple of words there, key words. Number one was purpose. So you've broken down your purpose into two things. Number one, uh, keep the customers happy, make sure they're happy. Number two, don't do anything for free. The other one I liked is processes, the other one you mentioned. So, and as we, on our entrepreneurial journey, even though processes sound boring, they're actually what help us scale and also take away a lot of the stress. Tell us a bit about your processes, because you work developing business software. So you're now embedded in creating processes for other companies as well, and I'm sure you're learning from that. So how important is process for your company?
So process is everything. And it is, all of our IP is our process, and it's how we create value. And the one piece that I didn't mention earlier, we have those two core values, but our overall mission, which it took me years and years to distill it down to its essence,
Yep.
and not have this big, long, wordy mission. Our overall mission is that we want to make software affordable and predictable. And that's actually a more difficult mission than you would imagine.
Oh,
My battery.
well, I could imagine it is very difficult.
Yeah, so like it's actually not super clever. In engineering, I'm just going to a plug-in over here. In engineering, you have an engineering triangle
Yep.
that basically says that you can have software with three attributes. It can be good, fast, and cheap. Like those are the attributes of a software project.
Yep.
And the joke is that have it your way, pick two. And it's a very true concept. Like it's easy to optimize for any of the two principles, but really hard to optimize for three. So what I saw was the opportunity was that most software projects, people care about the quality, they care about the budget. Most of the time, the timeline isn't that critical.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying that we take forever and a day to build the software, but we can tell you like most people would like to hear it'll be $80,000. It's going to be good. It'll be 3 to 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are good with that. But if you say like it's going to be June 12th and that's an aggressive date, all of a sudden the cost and the unpredictability and all that goes way up.
Yep.
So that's kind of what we realized the optimization we could make was. And so we we added that mission, and then the two values which allowed us to tweak our process. And then every time we tweak our process, it's in with an eyeball on, okay, is this going to make it affordable and predictable? And the other opportunity that we've seen in the marketplace is that software is a craft, which I've mentioned a few times, but currently a lot of the way it is pre-industrial revolution, from the standpoint that you've got a bunch of blacksmiths banging on hot metal until it looks like a sword. You
Yep.
know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you got 10 guys doing it next to each other, they're all banging on it slightly differently and all that kind of stuff. And you haven't had a lot of folks come along like when the guns got invented and they said, wait, let's just make this in a factory, and this guy does this and this guy does that and that gal does this. And so that's where we saw the opportunity, was that we could try and make software, instead of making it this craft where you have all these artists kind of doing their artistry. Let's make it to where it's a well-defined skill, that we can get folks in there, we can train them quickly, we can find, if we know how to train folks and we know, we can make it to where the 20% of the things you need to do to get 80% of your work done are fairly easy, using the skills that I've built up with architecture by creating these like programming tools and starting points. Then we're able to basically source from labor markets that just have really great attributes for our mission, which is affordable and predictable. And then we spread out the more expensive resources, which is the US based folks like me and the product owner and things like that. Instead of one client having to pay for our time full time, you just pay for what you need for those. And so we have these teams that are structured in a way that most things are at the most affordable price point. Then the more expensive folks are just doing the little 5% or 10% they need to do to make the project successful. And then the other piece of our process that is the predictable side of it is where it's really hard. And so my dad joke for that is that when people ask me, how do you get your developers to to be able to estimate correctly, I say, well, if it costs them money, they'll get good at it, right? so that's how me and Prashant got good at it, is it was costing us money when we got it wrong. I told Prashant early on, I said, look, when we sign a contract, when we get done, it's going to always take the same amount of money and time to get it done. That won't change. Like, we're going to execute as good as we can do. We know we do pretty good work, but if we tell them the wrong number at the beginning, it'll completely change the outcome of the project for our clients. I was like, so the most important part of the project is those initial contracts and those estimations. And so we've gotten pretty good with our estimation process. We do a 3-phase approach. We take an initial call. In the initial call, we can tell you, you say, hey, I want to create this app that allows whatever, finding something cool near me. And you're like, okay, and me and Prashant will listen to you and we'll say, that feels like about a 6-monther, 5 or 6. And he'll say, oh, I think it's more like 4 or 5, whatever. So we get some idea of like the number of months, and we have our design partner on the call. And so then they can go off with the design partner, and in 5 to 10 hours, he will take them into a flow chart that shows every type of user and every type of thing that they can do. So it'll go, okay, over here they can log in, and then there's these options. And so that only takes 5 to 10 hours. He doesn't charge a lot of money for that. Once we have that, it's called a user flow map. We can then revisit it, and they haven't had to spend a lot of money, but we can revisit it and say, okay, we can give you a much better idea of how long it's going to take now, because it's no longer just this nebulous thing that's in your head. Yep. And then the next phase takes 20 to 40 hours most of the time with Cody and his team. And that gets you to where you basically have a development specification. So if you're building a custom home, now you've got your architectural diagrams that fly through and all that kind of stuff. Then we can come through, and Prashant and I will create an estimate that every single line item is mostly like 2 hours, 4 hours, 6, like not very big. We go super granular on it. And the way that the diagrams are organized, or the architectural kind of drawing kind of stuff is organized, we're able to crank through that stuff pretty quickly. And then we have an estimate that we can commit to. And what we do software is different than a building. Um, when you build a house, if you're doing a custom home, you're not going to come in and say, you know what, this kitchen isn't quite right. You know, it'd be a little better. With software, that always happens. And that's what agile software development is all about. And so what we do is once we estimate it, we put a padding on there of about 30% that accounts for the fact that those ideal last hour estimates are usually off by about 15%,
Yep.
and to give us 15% wiggle room, because the process we follow will give you about 80 to 90% clarity on what needs to be built.
Mm-hmm.
But until you start using the software, you won't know, because you'll start using it and you're like, oh, this is a little awkward, you need to move this here, you know, all that kind of stuff. And so so we have some paddings for known unknowns that we put in there. And so we've just really evolved it a lot over time. And it's worked out pretty good for us. It makes it to where we can hit the mark pretty accurately most of the time, you know.
Yeah. You mentioned that there are 5 keys to success before building your software. Is that sort of what? So, can you tell us about that? What is it you mentioned on your website, that there's 5 keys to success before you start building your software? Can you remember what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've kind of distilled it down into more of a 4 key factors now. But basically, the idea is that if you're smart about your teams, your tools, your process, and your features, you'll be able to accomplish the affordable, predictable goal we have. And so the way we do that, I've already mentioned the team. We have a smartly distributed team. We get economies of scales on our most expensive resources. We're able to provide like high quality, affordable developers that are, you know, managed in the U.S. And you get the high end architecture and design when you need it, but only when you need it. Tools, we've really, I probably should send Mark Zuckerberg some money, because we've done a whole lot with his Facebook's framework called React. My second book was actually on React. It's a toolkit that allows you, with one programming language, to be able to write apps for web applications, mobile applications, backend systems. You can do pretty much anything with it. You can even store data using a native, it's called JSON, which is a JavaScript format. So what that allowed us to do strategically is like hire, if you normally are going to build, say mobile apps, for example, you need different engineers for iOS and for Android. And then if you're going to do web, you need different engineers for web. And then if you have, your team gets bigger, you have to quality assurance across all those teams, project management across all those teams. Your cost goes dramatically up. Well, with us using the React framework, we were able to take a small team of 5 developers, write mobile apps, backend systems, all this kind of stuff. So it really allowed us strategically to do a lot for our customers without having all these specialized folks that we have to try and keep busy. And then we talked a lot about process, you know, and that's just basically making sure that you do update your process whenever something goes wrong, and it'll get better. And then the last one, the features, is the easiest way to kind of bring this into pictures. If you ever watch the shows, my wife loves watching them, where they go and they want to buy these houses, you know, and they'll go to the real estate agent and they're like, these are our must-haves. And the real estate agent's like, okay, fine, I got one like that. And they take them to the house and they show it to him. And they're like, yeah, this checks all the boxes. And they're like, okay, it's $2 million. And they're like, well, our budget's $500,000. They're like, all right, let us show you the $500,000 house. You know, you know what I'm saying? It's like, what do you really need? You know, what can you really afford? You know, it's the question. And so software is incredibly expensive to build. You know, even the way we do it, it can be very expensive. And so what you really want to do is make sure that you just build the absolute simplest thing you can do and get it out in front of your users and customers as early as possible. And that just involves a lot. Like the folks who have the vision and have the passion, they're going to want to make that thing so nice. It's going to have so many bells and whistles, and, you know, and so really the part there is really us having frank conversations with the clients, and just saying, look, do you really need this? You really need that? And we kind of have to do sometimes what they do on their shows and just kind of do the estimate for everything. And they're like, oh my God. And you're like, well, do you sure you need real-time data? Is it okay if like we update it every, 5 minutes? And they're like, yeah, we could update it every 5 minutes. It's like, well, that knocks off about, yeah, and so
Yeah,
sometimes you have to let the numbers talk sometimes,
yeah, yeah. Well, I think what you've mentioned there is, and your job almost is to coach the client to create a minimal viable product.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
I heard
Yeah.
it, I've used this before. Was reading a book recently, and they used the term minimal lovable product.
Yep. That's the new one. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, which
Yeah.
I think is really, really cool. So that leads me to my next question. What are your sort of you you're in the middle of building this company. You've started. Who are you learning from? Who are the people and resources that you're learning from as you are on this journey and in the middle of building the business?
Yeah. That's a great question. So in the early days, it was really mostly just Prashant and I, kind of brainstorming off of stuff and debating stuff and all of that. We have a really, really solid relationship, which was pretty key. Super fortunate uh, to have a founder that matches so well, a co-founder, I should say. Sorry. But then I've got a few buddies who are on the entrepreneur journey. I mentioned my buddy Daryl already. I have another buddy named Nathaniel Richards, who he's kind of like my younger, older brother from another mother, if that makes any sense. So he's a little younger than me, but he's like an older brother because he's just like very wise. He's like a Ivy School graduate kind of guy, and he went from 1 to 2 years out of school in the middle of the recession and started a company and had a lot of success. And so he provided me a lot of mentorship over the years. And then once I started getting some steam, I joined an organization called Seven CTOs. And Seven CTOs is basically a lot of technology leaders. And the founder is a guy named Etienne de Bruin. And so I went to an early meetup he had here in Austin, and I was really impressed with the way he brought everyone together and the kind of things that the energy in the room and all that. And I'm just like, why doesn't Austin have this? We're supposed to be this really cool city, and there's just not like, and maybe I just wasn't in the community at the time, but I was like, I really want what they're doing out in San Diego, which is where Seven CTOs was based out of. I want that here in Austin. We've got a great city and we've got a lot of smart, passionate people. And so
Mm-hmm.
I helped Etienne get it going, and we have two forums in Austin now. And I met a lot of really smart, bright people through that journey who have been super helpful in navigating things. Then more recently, I've got into the Entrepreneur Organization Network. An EOA member, which is their accelerator program, and then also an EO sponsor. And through that, I've just met a ton of entrepreneurs, and there's just a lot of events where you get together and you just kind of swap war stories over drinks, and
Mm-hmm.
there's just a ton of wisdom in that stuff if you take the time out to do it.
Yeah, it's we get our sort of inspiration, I suppose, on the journey from a variety of sources. Sometimes it's people. Sometimes I find also books for me as well. But what I've
Mm-hmm.
loved, I started this podcast at the beginning of last year, and I've interviewed over 80 people now, and I've learnt so
Nice.
much just by hearing the stories.
Yep.
And I hear common themes, like process is certainly one. I'm curious about what got them to start. Was it a side hustle that became a main hustle? Did they leap in? Um, and I've just been grateful so much to hear everyone's stories and experiences and how they learned and also what they bring back to the world. So I'm inspired every time I have a chat, with smart people like yourself that have been on the journey. Um, and that takes me to my final question: is what top tips would you like to share with our audience in terms of what you learned along the way that would help them in their journey?
Yeah. So if people are thinking about getting into entrepreneurship, I think one thing is to consider where you are in your life, what stage of life you are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you're young and you can figure out the product side, wait a minute, Siri just took off on me.
Okay.
Sorry, Siri took off for some reason. I guess she thought I was calling her or something.
Yep.
If you're young and you can figure out the product side, grass is probably always greener. Um,
Mm.
but if you can get a product out there when you're young and you have the the stamina and the time to kind of try and build up a product, it would be super nice to be able to get to where you have your customers and you've got your monthly recurring revenue kind of built up. That way would be pretty good. Services is definitely a grind. um, it's not for everyone. If you're going to go the services route, definitely customer is king. For me personally, I had to take Sandler training, which is like it teaches you how to talk to customers and stuff like that, and
Right.
de-escalate. When folks are upset, things like that. Um, and then really the saying, another kind of joke saying, one that entrepreneurs quit their job working 40 hours a week for themselves to work 80 hours a week for someone else, is just super true. So if you're not looking to work that hard, um, you shouldn't do it. I saw another one the other day that said, as an entrepreneur, it's like I have six part-time jobs, three that I hate, and and I never know when quitting time is, And so those little sayings have a lot of wisdom in them. And then another thing about the journey is that you'll have different challenges at different times. So sustainability, getting through that is really just about how long can I tread water? How long can I introduce myself to people who don't think that I'm legit and like feel okay about it? And
Mm.
and how many rough projects can I get through to get to the point where I have a good offering. But once you get past sustainable and you get into growth, there's a whole different set of challenges. And I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs crash and burn at that time
Mm.
because you can get to a point where all of a sudden everything's on autopilot. Um, and, keeping the Mark Zuckerbergs and those type folks, they keep that fire going well after the finances are taken care of.
Mm.
Um, and so I think for your entrepreneurs that are later in the journey, it's making sure that you're finding that new passion and new challenges. And they have another saying in EO about that, which is the skills that got you here won't get you there.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, when you climb that first hill and you get to where you're like, oh wow, this is working. This company is actually a real company, and it's making money. Then to actually scale the company and get to that next level, you have to most likely you got there by doing your craft, right? But
Mm.
once you get to that point, you have to say, okay, I'm no longer going to do this thing that gives me so much pride in myself and self-esteem, and all of a sudden I'm going to try and do all this stuff that I don't even know if I'm good at.
Mm.
um, and so that's the part of the journey that I'm on right now. And you mentioned books earlier. I'm using Scaling Up and Traction. I'm sure you've
Yep.
probably heard of those
Yep.
books in the entrepreneur circles. And so we're kind of picking out parts of those processes that are valuable. And I actually qualify for EO proper, but I'm in EOA because the accelerator program, they teach you all of the books. I'm a little lazy to read them. so I'd rather go to the all day conferences and, have, have people tell you about it with snacks. So
Whatever
it's
floats your boat, you got to work that out, and everyone's different. So it's no right or
yeah.
wrong on this.
I mean, those books are so, I'm thinking like, oh, I could just do like I did the They Ask You Answer, the marketing book. I don't know if you've had that one. That's a fantastic book to learn about inbound content marketing. And I just got the audio book and listened to it in traffic, and stuff like that. I tried doing that with Scaling Up and Traction.
Mm.
Those aren't those kind of books. You gotta sit down with like a pen and a paper, and it's a whole different
Yeah.
thing in my opinion. So I'd much rather have someone kind of lecture it to me and then have other folks that I can talk to about it.
Okay. Any one final thought to leave with our audience that is you've discovered it's really really important as an entrepreneur?
um, the most important thing is just desire and relationships.
Okay.
You know, my dad's told me when I first kind of got into this, hungry dog gets the bone.
Right.
Um, And that's absolutely true. And then, if people like you, it's way easier.
Yeah, it is.
So,
Yeah.
so
Well, I've heard the quote used occasionally, and one of the founders of big commerce here in Australia said, "Life's too short to deal with assholes." So I think that's,
exactly.
and you've got to make sure
Yeah.
you're not one yourself.
Right. And
And
like I said, I had to take a training class to help me with that because I was a bit of a Vulcan for a while there. If you watch Star Trek, so
Okay, right, yeah. So that's yeah. So I love that desire in relationships. Work on both, and I think we're going to work. The challenge is, especially as you get along the journey, is trying to keep the fires burning. The fire burning in the belly.
absolutely.
The thing I've discovered about that in reflection is I think that the more why am I doing this listed. I think if you can reflect on that, that certainly helps a lot to keep the motivation going. And it's certainly something that I'm really curious about is what keeps that desire, that fire in the belly, that motivation going. And relationships are everything. And one of the reasons that kicked me over the line to start the podcast was one of the best benefits of a podcast is you're going to have an hour conversation with all these people, and guess what? You can develop relationships, and
Hmm.
it's amazing. And I've just loved meeting smart people like yourself and learning from them. And thank you very much for your time, Ryan. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, likewise, Jeff. Thanks for having me on the show, and I look forward to future conversations.
I look forward to catching up in real life on the stage when this craziness is over. So,
Yeah.
how can people contact you? What's the best way?
So if you come to the Vice Software website, there's a little pop-up that'll come straight to me. So if you just kind of answer a few questions, that'll get you right over to me. I'm not very active on Twitter, but I'm Ryan Vice1 on Twitter. Um, but the easiest way to get in touch with me is just to go to my website and use the little pop-up.
Great. Thank you very much, Ryan. Look forward to catching up in the USA.
Yeah, have a nice day, Jeff.
Or drag you over to Sydney.
Hey, I should be popping through in the next year or two. Like I said, my family's out there, so
Right, cool.
be a great excuse to check out Sydney.
Okay, and we'll get you on a ferry.
For sure. All right, man. Have a good one.